When I came out, I saw John and the cop were on the front porch. Progress. John was thanking the man for coming out, saying he hoped Frankie would remember me in his prayers because I could really use it right now. My life was really a mess, and I was just a complete pathetic loser struggling with my weight and financial problems and alcohol and erectile dysfunction. I decided to join them before John could defame me any further. The cop was already walking back toward his patrol car as John said, "And his girlfriend is away, and she's only got one hand. She lost it in an accident. You can imagine the problems that causes." Frankie was desperately trying to escape the conversation, talking into the little radio mounted on the shoulder of his uniform, letting headquarters know that everything was under control here. John and I watched him go. Then we heard a skittering by our feet and saw the goddamn spider run past our shoes. It vanished into the darkness, heading right toward the cop. I jumped off the porch, waving my hands. "Wait! Frankie! Officer Burgess, wait!" The cop stopped just short of the squad car and turned to me. I opened my mouth, but the words retreated back into my throat. A bundle of thin black legs appeared over Frankie's left shoulder, touching his bare neck, and he couldn't feel a thing. From behind me, John said, Frankie, don't move, man. You got something on you." Frankie put his hand on the butt of his gun again, looking alertly between me and John as if his crazy person troubles had just multiplied. The monster crawled over Frankie's shoulder and put his legs on his cheek. John screamed, "Frankie, do this!" John made a brushing motion on his own cheek as if waving away a fly. "Seriously, you got something on your face." Frankie, oblivious to his situation, did not follow these instructions. He started to say something about us not moving any closer. I lunged, throwing my hands toward the little monster. I never made it. Frankie did something to me that dropped me to my knees, gasping for air. It was some kind of chop to the throat, and man, it worked. I looked up and for the second time tried to warn Frankie, and for the second time I wasn't able to. The spider crawled around to Frankie's chest and then, in a blur, burrowed into his mouth. Frankie flailed backward and flung himself to the ground, his head thunking against his squad car's door on the way down. Frankie clawed at his mouth with his hands, gasping, choking, spasming. I backed away, crawling backward on my ass through the leaves. As I retreated, John advanced, saying, Frankie, hey!" Frankie wasn't responsive. His arms were locked in front of him, fingers curled, like he was being electrocuted. John spun on me and said, "We got to get him to the hospital." I sat there in the grass, frozen, wishing I could just go back inside and crawl under the covers again. John threw open both back doors of the cop car. He dug his hands under Frankie's shoulders. "Dave, help me." I got to my feet and took Frankie's ankles. We wrestled him into the backseat of the squad car, John backing out through the opposite door. We closed it up and John took the wheel. I slid beside John as he hunted around the console for a switch. He found it, flipped it. A siren pierced the night. He shifted into gear and tore down the street, red and blue flashing off every window in the neighborhood as we raced past. We blew through an intersection. I pulled on my seatbelt and braced my hands against the dash. "That thing came into my house, John. It came into my house." I know. I woke up and that thing was biting me. In my bed, John." We turned the corner, rounding a closed restaurant with "For Sale" painted on the windows in white shoe polish. We passed the blackened shell of a hardware store that had burned down last year. We passed a trailer park, and a used car dealership, and a 24-hour adult bookstore, and a skanky motel that never had any vacancies because lots of poor people lived there full-time. "It was in my house, John. Do you get what I'm saying here? Frankie couldn't even see it. It was on his face and he couldn't see it. It was in my house." I felt my body push against the armrest on the door, Tires squealed. John was taking a corner, car chase style. 2 blocks up was the concrete parking garage for the hospital, the lit windows of the hospital itself looming up behind it. I peered back through the wire screen separating us from Frankie, who was laying motionless across the back seat, eyes open. His chest was heaving, so at least he wasn't dead. Almost there, man. Hold on, okay? I turned to John. It crawled in his mouth. Did you see it? I saw it. Are they going to be able to help him? You really think the doctors can do something? We squealed into the parking lot and followed a sign that said emergency. We skidded to a stop in a covered drive up to the emergency room, threw open the back door and dragged out Frankie. Then clumsily lugged him toward a set of glass doors that slid open for us automatically. Before we got 5 feet inside, a couple of orderlies came and started barking questions at us that we had no answers to. Somebody rolled up a gurney. John started talking, telling the guys that the cop had had some kind of seizure, that he had something in his throat. Definitely to check his throat. There was a flicker of red and blue lights out of the corner of my eye, a second cop car turning in fast across the parking lot. They probably saw John and me tearing ass through town and followed us here. The orderlies were rolling away Frankie, and a third guy showed up, a doctor, I guess, taking his vitals. I turned to John to tell him about the second cop car, but he had already spotted it. I followed him back out to the sidewalk. Think we should hang around? He asked. I don't think so. I'm already on probation. Dave, they're going to come get us. They want to know what happened. Nah, I don't think this thing's going to be a big deal. Probably send us a nice card for getting Frankie to the hospital. Come on. We took off walking, since it didn't seem wise to go back home in the stolen cop car. We went around the edge of the lot as the approaching police car whooshed past us. It skidded to a stop next to Frankie's vehicle, and 2 cops spilled out and went inside. We silently cut across the lawn and crossed a street with a traffic light blinking yellow. We cut through the darkened parking lot of a Chinese restaurant called Panda Buffet, which did not, in fact, serve panda meat as far as we knew. Behind it was one of the city's many abandoned properties, the depressing twin buildings of an old tuberculosis asylum that had been closed since the 60s, the gray bricks tinged moss green. John lit a cigarette and asked, So, what do you think that thing was? I didn't answer. I found myself scanning the dark plane of each parking lot we passed, studying the shadows, looking for movement. I noticed my steps were hurrying me unconsciously toward the pool of light under the next street lamp. We passed into the parking lot of a tire place with a 10-foot-tall tire mascot standing by the street. The mascot was made of real tires, with mufflers for arms and a chrome wheel for a head. Some joker had used white spray paint to draw a penis on the front of it in the anatomically appropriate spot. John said, So that thing crawled into his mouth. What do you think it was doing? How should I know? A blur of red and blue zipped by. Another cop car, lights flashing. 30 seconds later, another one. John said, Man, these guys really gather around one of their own, don't they? We walked on, hesitant, a sick feeling in my gut. 2 more cop cars flew by. One had different markings. State cop, I guess. They're just going there to check up on him. Right, John? I don't know, man. Let's get home. We'll see if they got anything about it on TV. But he had stopped, saying, No point. All you'll get is the news after it gets filtered for the reporters. We'll get better information if we go back down there. John, we'd just be in the... I stopped at the sound of a distant scream. John said, You hear that? No. Another cop car zipped past. How many of those did we have in this town? Come on, Dave. John took off walking back the way we came. I stood my ground. I didn't want to go back there, and I'm not ashamed to admit this, I also didn't want to walk back to my place alone, in the dark. I raised a hand to touch the spot on my eye where I had been bitten. Raw flesh under a Band-Aid. I winced as the pain in my shoulder stopped me before I could get my hand up there. The chunk taken out of my skin there was getting sorer by the minute. I was about to tell John to have fun without me when the sound of distant gunshots, like firecrackers. John started jogging back across the store tire parking lot toward the hospital. I let out a breath and then followed. 27 hours prior to outbreak. We arrived on the hospital grounds to see that all hell had broken loose. 6 cop cars were parked haphazardly around the emergency room entrance, lighting up the parking lot like a dance floor. There was an ambulance, its rear doors open. People were spilling out of the hospital entrance, their heads down like they were running the trenches in a war zone. One lady came out in aqua blue scrubs, one side of her blonde hair matted down with blood. There was a clump of onlookers on the far side of the lawn that included 3 or 4 wheelchairs, maybe 50 yards from the hospital. It looked like they were gathering patients there, getting them away from the building. One cop was talking to them and gesturing with his hand, karate chopping the air with each barked command. His other hand held a pistol pointed at the sky. More shots from inside. John, possessing a genetic defect that makes him walk toward danger, strode down toward where it looked like some cops were trying to set up a perimeter around the chaos. Somewhere, Charles Darwin nodded and smiled a knowing smile. We came upon 2 cops blocking the sidewalk. A fat one with glasses and an older guy whose face was all mustache. John stepped off the sidewalk as if to walk right past them on the grass. The cop with the glasses put out a hand and told us to stop, in a tone that suggested if we didn't, he would taser us until our blood boiled. We backed off, stepping aside as paramedics hustled the bleeding head lady past us. She was crying, holding her head, saying over and over again, "He wouldn't die. He just wouldn't die. They shot him over and over again, and he..." John tapped my shoulder and pointed. A boxy truck was pulling up, blue with white letters on the side. I thought it was some kind of paddy wagon, but when the doors opened, a SWAT team spilled out. Holy shit. John moved off the sidewalk and up onto the lawn in front of the building. There were some benches there, and a 10-foot-tall bronze statue of a lady in old-timey nurse's garb holding a lantern. Florence Nightingale? I followed John and we joined a small crowd of onlookers. Gunshots, rapid shots, dozens of them. Gasps from the audience. I could barely see down there, but I could make out people running out of the building, frantic. One lady fell down and got accidentally kicked hard in the face. Then, a man came out supported on the shoulders of 2 hospital staff, his right leg missing from the knee down. Or at least that's what it looked like. Keep in mind we were still far enough away that the door looked about the size of a postage stamp. And I was trying to look through a growing crowd in front of me. That's why I can't be totally sure about what happened next. First, a man in a black SWAT outfit came running out of the building screaming something. I couldn't hear him from where we were standing, but to this day, John insists the man was screaming, "Run away!" Then, shots. Loud, sharp, close. Next came the screams. Screams from every single human being close enough to the lobby to see what was going on. 3 cops near the entrance ducked behind the parking patrol cars and trained guns on the sliding doors. A man lumbered out. Every gun barrel followed him. It was Officer Frankie Burgess. He was wearing his cop uniform pants and a red shirt. No, that's not right. It was a white undershirt, stained with blood over 80% of its area. People crowded around, blocking my view. John craned his neck and said, "It's Frankie. Everybody's got their guns on him, like he's dangerous. Did he shoot all those people? Hey, move, buddy. I can't see." Frustrated, John went to the nurse statue and, to my horror, climbed it. He got up to where both hands were on her shoulders, his shoes planted on her forearms. Florence's face was planted in John's crotch. I waved at him. "John, Get down from there. I can see him. It looks like they're talking to him. I don't see a gun. Oh, shit. Look at his right arm. Dave, his right arm's broken. And I mean, it's almost broken at a right angle. And Frankie doesn't even act like he cares. Oh, wait. Something's going on. A cop voice from nearby said, "Get down from there. You, get down." John ignored him. A burst of gunfire. Everybody ducked. "They're shooting him," shouted John. "They're shooting a lot. You can see bits of him flying off. He's still up. Holy shit, holy shit. He just grabbed one of the SWAT guys. He grabbed him by the ankles and is swinging him around like a baseball bat. He's knocking the other guys down." "Bullshit, John. Get down from there." "He's biting a guy now. He's eating him. A cop. He's got him by the neck." "What?" More shots. Screams. Suddenly, I was awash in a panicked current of swinging elbows and shoulders. John jumped down from the statue and ran with the crowd as fast as he could. Over his shoulder, he yelled, "Dave, he's coming!" I took 2 steps, and somebody slammed into me. My face bounced off wet grass. I climbed to my knees in the stampede. A woman nearby screamed at the top of her lungs. I spun, and between running figures, saw a shirt stained red with blood. Frankie. Standing right there, left arm jutting grotesquely just under the elbow, blood dripping to the grass from a protruding shard of bone. Police were shouting in the distance, commanding us to get down. How did he beat them here? He cleared half a football field in 5 seconds. Frankie's torso was riddled with puckered bullet wounds, leaking red. His chest heaved with excited breaths, his punctured lungs whistling with each inhale. The broken arm was moving, twitching, the bones tearing free of skin and curling like tentacles. What the shit? Cops ran into position. I saw one SWAT guy fumbling to cram a new magazine into the little submachine gun he had. They shouted orders at each other and at the crowd. Frankie opened his mouth, opening wide like a yawn. And just for a second, I thought I saw the face of the spider, nesting there behind his teeth, filling the cavity with its black body. Then the Frankie monster let out a noise like I had never heard before. It was a shriek, like microphone feedback, but more organic and pained, like the sound a whale would make if it were on fire. The ground shook from it. My bowels quivered. I think I shat a little. I saw people hitting the ground all around me. Saw guns fall from the hands of cops. I clapped my palms over my ears as the pained shriek of Frankie the monster filled my bones. Frankie's back arched, his mouth open to the sky, howling. Blood was spurting from a dozen bullet holes. It was the last thing I saw before the world swam away and went black. I came to and sat up. People were standing around, nobody running. No sign of Frankie. Some time had passed. The horizon was shitting a sun, casting a glow on a layer of fog that was settling in the low areas like puddles of ghost piss. I saw John about 10 feet away, on his feet but bent over at the waist, gripping his pants at the knees. He was blinking, as if trying to focus his eyes. "John, you all right?" He nodded, still looking at the ground. "Yeah, I'm thinking that sound he made melted our brains. Did they get him?" "Don't know. Just came to." A white truck pulled up with a dish apparatus on the back. It had a TV station logo on the side. We were about to be on live TV. I tried to fix my hair with my hands. Hospital staff in aqua scrubs were walking people back into the building. It looked like every policeman in the state was here, taking statements from people. I realized John and I should probably get going before we got asked a bunch of questions that, once again, we didn't have any non-crazy answers for. Not just about tonight, but everything. I turned toward John, but John wasn't there anymore. I went looking for him, giving one pair of cops a wide berth along the way. I thought about just going home without him, but then I saw him standing out by the street and talking to a goddamn reporter. I stomped over there, walked right in front of the camera, and was about to grab him by the collar and drag him away when John said, "Oh, shit!" I followed John's gaze and said, "Oh, shit." The reporter lowered her microphone and said, "Oh, shit." Army guys, a lot of them. National Guard, I guessed. They were wearing that grayish urban camo they wear these days. They had parked a green truck across the intersection where the hospital driveway met the road. Cars were lined up trying to get out, and soldiers were going down the line and issuing instructions to angry drivers. Up by the truck, a soldier raised a bullhorn and said, "Attention. Do not leave the area. There is a significant chance you have been exposed to a contagious pathogen. Leaving the area could lead to spreading the infection to your family and friends. By order of the Centers for Disease Control, you are not to leave the area. Please go back to the lobby of the hospital where you will be given further instructions. This is for your own safety. We apologize for the inconvenience, and you will be released as soon as it is determined that you do not pose an infection risk to those around you. Thank you for your cooperation. If you attempt to leave the area, you will be prosecuted. Do not attempt to leave the area." John tossed down his cigarette, stamped it out, and said, "Let's leave the area." Yeah. We left the reporter behind and circled around, looking for a way out. We found the ambulance-only entrance around the block had a Humvee across it. Sorry, I'm going to burp. Nope, I'm not. The soldiers were forming a perimeter, camouflage dots looping around the grounds. We looked around behind the building, where there was a little strip of wood separating the hospital grounds from town. Same scene, with the addition of some guys... Oh, am I going to sneeze? Oh, hold on. Same scene with the addition of some guys unloading spools of razor wire from the back of a truck. John spat and said, "This might sound like an odd thing to say right at this moment, but I wish those guys were wearing hazmat suits." Yeah, or at least something covering their mouths. There wouldn't happen to be a door around here, would there? A door? You know, one of the... Oh, there's not one in the hospital as far as I know. That would have been awfully convenient, though. John thought for a moment, then said, "What about BB's? It's right on the other side of the trees there." BB's was a convenience store about 2 blocks away, but on the other side of that little wooded area. Among those trees was a deep drainage ditch we'd also have to cross. Man, I don't know. He edged around to get a look at the guardsman standing between us and the woods. He said, "Come on, we'll wait till that guy goes to help unload some more of that wire, then run right through the gap there. But if we're going to do it, we have to do it now, before the sun comes all the way up." "And what makes you think those other guys won't shoot us in the head?" They're not going to do that. All these guys know is they got up in the wee hours of the morning to fence off a hospital because a guy went on a shooting rampage, and they're afraid some diseases may have escaped. They don't know there's a, monster situation going on. And you know all of that how? TJ Fry is over on the other side. You remember TJ. Came to that party a few years ago and stuck his dick in the jelly. He's like a sergeant now. Said they haven't been told shit. Well, they're gonna chase us. Yeah. We just gotta make it to BB's. John stripped off his shirt and started wrapping it around his face, like he was ready to join some riot in the Middle East. Cover your face, unless you want them to identify you and show up at your house in an hour. Peering through a 1/4-inch slit of wrapped t-shirt, we crouched low and stayed in the shadows until we reached the narrow stretch of lawn between us and the woods. We stayed like that for about 15 minutes, until one guard left his post to accept a cup of coffee from another. We sprinted. I immediately slipped in the wet grass and fell on my face. My shirt mask slipped over my eyes. I scrambled to my feet and just ran, as hard and fast as I could, nearly blind. I heard shouted commands, but no gunshots. A branch slapped me in the face, and I knew I had reached the woods. I stumbled and clawed the shirt away from my eyes just in time to feel the ground give way under me. I was sliding down an embankment of wet grass and dead leaves, then splashed into freezing, ankle-deep water. It was dark. There had been an early morning gloom out on the lawn, but it was still midnight under the trees. No sign of John. Or anyone else. I sloshed through the water and scrambled up the other side, pulling myself up with handfuls of weeds, knocking aside discarded grocery bags and flattened plastic Coke bottles. A hand latched around my ankle. A different hand latched around my wrist. John up top, one of the soldiers on bottom. For a ridiculous moment, I was pulled in opposite directions like a cartoon character, both men shouting frantic instructions at me. I tried to kick free and accidentally kicked the guy in the head in the process. It worked. In 3 seconds, John and I were out of the woods and sprinting diagonally across the parking lot, through the bay of car wash, down an alley, and toward the gray bricks and rusting dumpster that was the ass end of BB's convenience store. I risked a look over my shoulder. Shit! There were no fewer than 10 soldiers following us now. The 2 in the lead carrying black plastic pistols with neon green tips. They looked like toys, but I knew they were tasers. I was eager to avoid my 5th lifetime tasering, if at all possible. The restroom door was on the exterior of the store, around the corner to our left. I rushed up to it, grabbed a rickety knob, and... Locked! I said, trying to catch my breath. The key, inside. You have to get the key from the counter inside. John shoved me aside, reared back, and kicked the door. The whole knob and latch mechanism exploded. We crammed ourselves inside, pushing the broken door closed. 1, 2, 3. Hey, you two, get the fuck out of there and lay the fuck down on the pavement before we have to... The soldier was cut off in mid-word. I pulled open the door to find we were surrounded by panties. We stepped outside of the ladies' dressing room at the Walmart on the opposite side of town. John and I had traveled about 2.5 miles in approximately 0 seconds. Right now, at BB's, several very confused National Guardsmen were staring at an extremely filthy and completely empty public bathroom. We stepped into the aisle of the nearly empty store, 2 muddy men with t-shirts wrapped around their heads. John unwrapped his and said, "What is this, Walmart?" So I wasn't completely honest with the psychiatrist about the whole thing with the mysterious door in the burrito stand and the Asian dude who disappeared into it. John and I have identified 6 of these doors around town, and we know where they lead to each other. The only thing is, you never knew to which of the other doors they were going to take you. It was basically doorway roulette. I mean, You're not going to step out in Beijing or anything. It's always another door around town. All the ones we've found, anyway. But they never seem to go to the same place twice. Why? Because this whole town is fucked up. That's why. I keep trying to tell you that. You don't want to come here. It's exhausting. John and I didn't draw much attention as we moved through the store, since at this particular store in this particular town, we weren't even the filthiest people here. We just walked right out the front door and headed back toward town along the shoulder of the highway. It was a wet, chilled morning under a lethargic November sky that had rolled out of bed and thrown on an old, gray, grease-stained t-shirt. John said, "Did you hear? They never found Frankie." Wonderful. What do you think happened? You think that bug thing took over his brain? Hey, why not? You think he's going to turn up again? If you're asking yourself why the men with guns chasing us couldn't just use the magic door and follow us right to Walmart, it's because for most people, the doors are just doors. Same as for most people, the spider monster in my house would have been invisible, just as it was for Frankie. Same as how if you'd been in the bathroom with me all those months ago, when I saw that shadowy shape outside my shower, you'd have seen nothing. You might have sensed something, just as in your everyday life you might sit in a dark house and feel like you're not alone, or have a nagging suspicion that something slipped around a corner just a moment before you looked. The feeling can usually be expressed by the phrase, "Of course there's nothing there. Now." To be clear, if you've actually seen a ghost, that doesn't make you like us. A ghost sighting is usually nothing more than your brain trying to put a familiar face on something that does not have a face at all. John and I, on the other hand, can see what most of you can only sense. We're not special. It's just the result of some drugs we took. Just for future reference, if you're ever at a party and a Rastafarian offers you a syringe full of a slimy black substance that crawls around on its own like the blob, don't take it. And don't call us either. We get enough bullshit from strangers as it is. 25 hours prior to outbreak. English should have a word for that feeling you get when you first wake up in a strange room and have no freaking idea where you are. Hatezelment? I was cold, and every inch of my body was in pain. I heard a crunching, like the jaws of a predator grinding through bone. I pulled open my eyes. I saw a dragon standing proudly atop a hill before me. The dragon was on a TV screen. Beneath it was a video game console with a tangle of cords snaking across green carpet. I blinked, squinted at the sun burning in through a cracked window. I turned, hearing my neck creak as I did, and saw John sitting at a computer desk in the corner, staring into the monitor and holding a bottle full of clear liquid that I'm sure you wouldn't want to try to put out a fire with. I sat up, realizing I had been covered up with something in my sleep. I thought for a moment John had thrown a blanket over me, but closer inspection revealed it to be a beach towel. John glanced back at me from his computer chair and said, "Sorry, I used my spare blanket when I got that leak in my car." I looked around for the source of that animal crunching noise. I found Molly laying behind the couch, her head crammed inside an open box of Cap'n Crunch cereal. She was eating as fast as she could, trying to use her paws to keep the box in place. "You're letting her do that?" "Oh, yeah. Cereal is stale anyway. I don't have any dog food here." The dragon sat frozen on the television, the intro screen for a video game John had apparently been playing while I slept on his couch. "What time is it?" "Around 8. I stood and felt my head swim. I rubbed my eyes and almost screamed in pain from the wound there. My shoulder felt like it had taken a bullet, and it seemed like a pair of elves were trying to escape my skull through my temples using tiny pickaxes. It wasn't the first time I had woken up at John's place feeling like this. My phone screamed. The display read, Amy. I closed my eyes, sighed, and answered. Hey, baby. Hi, David. I'm watching the news. What happened? Shouldn't you be in class? Amy had failed a pretty basic English class last semester because it was a morning class and she kept sleeping through it. She said, They canceled it. Oh, it's on again. Turn to CNN. I talked through the phone to John, told him to switch over the TV. He did, and watched as an early morning shot of the chaos of the hospital filled the screen. The name of the city was displayed along the bottom. National News. John turned up the sound and we heard a female reporter say, No history of drug use or mental illness. Frank Burgess had been with the department for 3 years. Authorities are combing the area for Burgess, but police say the number of wounds he sustained in the standoff make his turning up alive, quote, highly unlikely. Meanwhile, the hospital remains under quarantine due to unspecified infection risks that have only added to the anxiety in this shell-shocked community. They cut to a shot of our enormously fat chief of police giving a soundbite in front of a bank of microphones. To Amy, I said, Man, our chief of police is getting huge. Amy said, They said 13 people were hurt, and I think 3 people died, but there could be more. Did you guys hear about this last night, when it was all going on? A pause on my end. Too long. Finally, I said, We heard about it, yeah. Uh-oh. What? David, were you there? Were you guys in on this? What? No, of course not. Why would you think that? David. No, it was nothing. Guy just went crazy, that's all. Are you lying? No. She said nothing. She and the therapist knew the same trick, filling the silence. I said, I mean, we were there, but we weren't really involved. I knew it. I'm coming down. No, Amy, it's nothing, really. It's over. We just happened to be in the area. I heard John say, Hey, it's me. I turned to the television. Sure enough, John's face filled the screen. The reporter's voiceover covered the audio, saying, But for every hour Burgess remains at large, fear and paranoia are bound to keep growing in this small city. On TV, John's voice faded in. And then we saw a small creature crawl into his mouth. I wasn't 2 feet away. I saw it clearly. The thing wasn't from this world. I don't mean alien. I mean probably interdimensional in nature. I think it's obvious from what happened tonight that this being possessed some powers of mind control. I closed my eyes again and groaned. Amy said, I'm coming down. I'll take the bus. Forget it. Your classes are more important. If you fail English again, I think they can kick you out of the country. I think it's in the Patriot Act. Gotta go, honey. I'm late for class. You said you didn't. We'll talk about it later. Bye-bye. I killed the phone and looked for my shoes. You going back home? I can't stay here, John. Yeah, but, you had that thing in your house. You think there's another one? No, I don't know, but what do you want me to do? Have the place sprayed? No, I'm just saying. That thing. It crawled inside Frankie and seemed to take him over. Well, that thing turned up in your bed. Are you assuming that's an accident? Because maybe we should consider that it was there for you. I can always trust John to think of things like this. It doesn't matter, okay? Your couch isn't long enough. It kills my neck on the armrest, so it's moot. Well, you're not getting the bed. I took away Molly's cereal box, which was now just empty cardboard, bent in the shape of a dog head. I said, "You sounded crazy on the news, by the way. I hope you know that." What? I was telling the truth. To what purpose exactly? The only people who will be convinced by that are people who are already nuts. I can see you've got your blog up right now. For what? So you can tell the whole nonsense story and be one more nut job ranting on the internet? It doesn't do anybody any good. It just makes you look crazy. It makes both of us look crazy. Hey, aren't you going to be late for your court-mandated therapist appointment? Fuck you. I glanced at my watch. He was right. The drive through town was surreal. I had to go past the hospital. Okay, I didn't have to, but curiosity got the better of me. And it had the air of a natural disaster. News vans were parked outside of barriers that were blocking the street. Cops were at a checkpoint directing traffic away from the parking garage entrance. 3 blocks later, I had to wait in an intersection for 5 minutes while a row of green trucks rumbled past. Military. I suddenly wanted to get far away from here. I had half hoped I would find the psychiatrist office closed today, as if the aftermath of a shooting rampage would be treated like a national holiday. No such luck. People got to make a paycheck, I guess. I barged in before I realized there was somebody else in the waiting room. Should have looked in through the window or something. I would have waited outside if I'd known, since the potential for really awkward conversation seems pretty high in the waiting room of a psychiatrist's office. I tried to think of a plausible excuse for turning around and leaving. The best I came up with was to grab the potted plant in the corner and just walk out, as if it was a rental I was repossessing. I decided not to. The lady in the waiting room didn't even turn to me when I came in. She was transfixed by a television in the corner turned to Fox News, covering the shooting. Jesus, slow news day. People get shot all the time, right? I found a chair as far away from her as possible. I grabbed a magazine and held it in front of my face. Seemed to be a lot of articles about wedding dresses. "It's happening all over, you know," said the woman from the other side of the room. She was probably 45 or so, hair a desperate shade of blonde. I said, "What's that?" "Demon possession, all over the world. You see news from the Middle East and such, and you can see it spreading like wildfire." "Uh-huh. It's easier now that all the souls are gone." I flipped the page of my bridal magazine, acting engrossed in the ads. The only thing worse than always being the craziest person in the room is when suddenly you're alone with somebody crazier. She was still talking. "Did you know the rapture happened already? In 1961. The Lord called all the souls up to heaven, but the bodies were left behind. That's why the people walking around today don't seem to have souls. It's because they don't. You see the story last week? The man who was being chased by the police in a stolen car? There was a newborn baby in the back seat. He just threw it out the window. A baby. People these days are just common animals because their human souls are gone. See?" I lowered the magazine and said, "That's not a bad theory, actually." They called it the mark of the beast, but they don't need a mark. They reveal themselves as beasts with time. The door to the office creaked open, and out walked a gorgeous teenage girl. For a baffled second, I thought this was somehow my therapist, like maybe she was filling in today. But of course, she was just a patient, and Dr. Tennant was behind her. The crazy woman in the waiting room stood and thanked the doctor and walked out with the girl. The lady hadn't been there for treatment. She was just giving her daughter a ride. "Right off. Dr. Tennant asked. What happened to your eye? Got in a fight with John. He said counseling was a waste of time, and I told him I'd be damned if I'd hear him insult you in your profession. You look like you haven't slept. How can I, with what's going on? Have you been watching the news today? Do you know if they found Frankie? He wasn't expected to live, was he? Do you know him? What? No. Why would I have known him? You called him Frankie. Well, I went to high school with him, but that was years ago. I didn't have anything to do with what happened, if that's what you mean. Not at all. Because I didn't. I'm sorry if I made you feel accused. I glanced out the window at the exact moment a green truck rumbled by on the street outside. Why are there so many army trucks? This all seems like an overreaction. Don't you think? Not letting me change the subject, Tennant said. I would like to come back to what you talked about last time, about having to hide your true self from the world and feeling like you were powerless to become the type of person who would not have to hide. Just now, you seemed to feel like I was accusing you. I'd like to talk about that if we can. I stared out the window and chewed a fingernail. Man, I did not want to be here. In this office, in this town, in this life. I wanted to just walk out. I knew at some point the cops were going to scoop up John. He'd appeared on goddamn television right in the area they were trying to quarantine. And that meant eventually they'd come get me too. What the hell was I doing here? Because you have nowhere else to go. I said, I don't know. 24 hours ago, I'm sitting here trying to justify believing crazy things. And one day later, the whole town has gone crazy. So, in my mind, the rest of the world is now caught up to my craziness, which means I should be set free. I rubbed my itchy eyes and said, there are real monsters, Doc. I'm too tired to say anything else. He said, I read some of the things you and your friends posted on the internet. Sometimes you speak of yourself as if you were a freak or a monster. Well, metaphorically, I mean, aren't we all? The woman in the waiting room just now basically told me the same thing. An incident like last night always brings out those kinds of feelings, I suppose. I considered for a moment, then said, can I ask you a question, Doc? Of course. What would you say if I asked to use your computer there, on your desk? Right now, without you having a chance to delete anything. Of course, there's confidential patient information that I couldn't... Let's say I could promise I wouldn't look at any of that. In fact, let's say I just want to look at your internet browser history. How would you feel about that? It would be an invasion of privacy, of course. And I have credit cards and logins. I'm talking about the porn, Doc. Would I find nasty schoolgirl porn on there? Maybe interracial stuff? Incest fantasies? I feel like you're trying to get a reaction from me. If you're not feeling like going through with the session, we can continue on Monday. No, listen. When I'm with Amy and I ask to borrow her computer, she passes it right over. No questions asked. No hesitation. She could sit there and look over my shoulder and watch me sift through every single file. And she wouldn't flinch. She has nothing to hide. It'd be the same if I had a machine that could peer into her mind. She'd be fine with it. She's comfortable with what she is. But, on the other hand, if she's visiting and she has to use my laptop, man, there is so much depraved shit on there that if she saw it all, she'd call the fucking cops. If she could see what goes through my mind when I see another girl walk by, she'd burst into tears. He nodded. So you feel like you have to hide a part of yourself, and she doesn't. I'm saying it's like that with everybody. There are two kinds of people on planet Earth: Batman and Iron Man. Batman has a secret identity, right? So Bruce Wayne has to walk around every second of every day knowing that if somebody finds out his secret, his family is dead, his friends are dead, everyone he loves gets tortured to death by costume supervillains. And he has to live with the weight of that secret every day. That tension gnawing in his guts. But not Tony Stark. He's open about who he is. He tells the world he's Iron Man. He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't have that shadow hanging over him. He doesn't have to spend energy building up those walls of lies around himself. You're one or the other. Either you're one of those people who has to hide your real self because it would ruin you if it came out, because of your secret fetishes or addictions or crimes, or you're not one of those people. And the two groups aren't even living in the same universe. You believe you're Batman. I closed my eyes. What did you say my hourly rate was for these sessions again? I mean, you're in that category. You feel like the people around you would react badly if they knew what you really thought and believed. Not because they'll think I'm crazy. They already think that. But because of how they would react once they knew the truth. You know how people are. That's what you write books about, right? Group panics and all that. You think the truth would cause mass hysteria? I shrugged and nodded toward the window. Look out there. You'll see. He said, "That's actually more true than you know. Don't repeat this, but it appears I'm going to be called in to work on this case. The hospital shooting, I mean." What? Like as a profiler or something? Oh, no. I'd be offering my assistance in dealing with the public. It's the panic that is the primary concern, you see. Making sure no one gets a hair trigger. Some poor soul waiting by their back door with a hunting rifle, shooting at a shadowy shape in their backyard that turns out to be their neighbor. Fear can be fatal, and as I suppose you see on my bookshelf, I am something of an expert. I thought, that has to be nice, to have a job where fear is something that happens to other people. I stared out the window and said, "Do you ever get scared, Dr. Tennant?" "Of course, but you know these sessions aren't about me. And besides, in your world, everything has some harmless explanation, right? It's always bees. Even this thing with Frankie. Your job will be, what, to go up to a bank of microphones and assure everybody that it's all bees?" You feel like I was being dismissive of your fears. I apologize if so. So does anything scare you, Doctor? Anything irrational? Of course. Here, I'll volunteer my most embarrassing example. I feel like I owe it to you to make up for the bee story. Are you a fan of science fiction? I don't know. My girlfriend is. All right, but you know Star Trek. And Beam Me Up, Scotty? How they can teleport people around? Yeah, the transporters. Do you know how they work? Just special effects, CGI, or whatever they used? No, I mean within the universe of the show. They work by breaking down your molecules, zapping you over a beam and putting you back together on the other end. Sure. That is what scares me. I can't watch it. I find it too disturbing. I shrugged. I don't get it. Well, think about it. Your body is just made of a few different types of atoms. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and so on. So this transporter machine, there's no reason in the world to break down all of those atoms and then send those specific atoms thousands of miles away. One oxygen atom is the same as another. So what it does is it sends the blueprint for your body across the beam. Then it reassembles you at the destination out of whatever atoms it has nearby. So if there is carbon and hydrogen at the planet you're beaming down to, it'll just put you together out of what it has on hand because you get the exact same result. Sure. So it's more like sending a fax than mailing a letter. Only the transporter is a fax machine that shreds the original. Your original body, along with your brain, gets vaporized, which means what comes out the other end isn't you. It's an exact copy that the machine made of a man who is now dead, his atoms floating freely around the interior of the ship. Only within the universe of the show, nobody knows this. Meanwhile, you're dead for eternity. All of your memories and emotions and personality end right there on that platform. Forever. Your wife and children and friends will never see you again. What they will see is this unnatural photocopy of you that emerged from the other end. And in fact, since transporter technology is used routinely, all of the people you see on that ship are copies of long dead vaporized crew members. And no one ever figures it out. They all continue to blithely step into this machine that kills 100% of the people who use it. But nobody realizes it because each time, it spits out a perfect replacement for the victim at the other end. I stared at him. Why did you tell me that? He shrugged. You asked. His face showed nothing. I thought of the Asian guy, casually disappearing into the magic burrito door, walking out somewhere else. And in that moment, I almost asked Tennant what he knew and who he was. I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. 18 hours prior to outbreak. Hours went by, and the cops continued to not show up at either my house or John's apartment. All morning I was worried sick about what I would say when they brought me in, but then afternoon came and I was even more worried about the fact that they weren't coming after us. That means things have gotten so out of control that we were no longer on their list of priorities. Come mid-afternoon, I found myself at work, standing behind a counter, trying to peel the magnetic anti-theft tag off a DVD with my fingernail. By the way, a DVD is a disc that plays movies, if they don't have those by the time you read this. I know I've complained about the pain in my eye and shoulder more than once, but I want to point out that the bite on my leg was also starting to hurt like a son of a bitch. I would have called in sick, but I had used up all my sick days for the year and couldn't take off again until January. I take a lot of sick days, most of them self-declared mental health days, meaning I wake up in a mood that I know will lead me to assault the very first person who asks me if the 2-day rentals have to be back on Wednesday or Thursday. I had worked at Wally's Video for 5 years, been a manager for 2. I started right after I dropped out of college. At the time, I had heard that Quentin Tarantino got discovered while working at a video store, and I think I had it in my head to try to work there and write a screenplay. It was going to be about a cop in the future with a sentient flamethrower for an arm. At age 19, that seemed like a pretty sound plan. The thing about not having parents is you don't have anyone to tell you you're headed down a path paved with grossly inaccurate expectations of what the world owes you. The people who raised me, and I'll leave their names out of this, they did what they could. Nice people, real religious. Kind of treated me like I was a little African refugee kid they had rescued. They knew my story, knew that I had never known my dad. Years later, when I got in trouble at school and got kicked out because of the kid that died, they were real supportive. Took my side all the way through. Then, shortly after they moved to Florida, they hinted that maybe things would be better if I stayed behind. My birth mom is living in Arizona, I think, staying with a dozen other people in an arrangement that could be called a compound. She sent me a letter 2 years ago, 30 pages scribbled on lined notebook paper. I couldn't make it past the first paragraph. I skipped down to the last sentence, which was, I hope you are stockpiling ammunition like I told you. The forces of the Antichrist will first seek to disarm us. I scraped the plastic theft sticker off the DVD, put it back in its case, then picked another case off the stack, pulled out the disc, started scraping off the tag. I looked around, saw there was only one customer in the store. A guy wearing a cowboy hat. His jeans looked like they were painted on. The TV we had mounted in the far corner of the store was supposed to be playing a promotional DVD, but I had switched it over to headline news, with the sound down and the closed captioning turned on. They had been going back to the hospital shooting every 20 minutes or so. The cowboy with the tight pants came up to the counter with a copy of Basic Instinct 2 and 2001: A Space Odyssey. How could he walk in those jeans? Did they inflate when he farted? I glanced up at the TV and saw a reporter standing in front of a street barricade. Closed captioning mentioned something about cops having to break up an angry crowd trying to get in to see loved ones at the hospital. The cowboy gave me his membership card, and I punched in the number. His account came up as name, James Dupree. Overdue, 0. Account status, A. Comments. This man has worn the same trousers since he was a toddler. Many memos had circulated at Wally's about abusing the customer comment box on the computer. We have John to thank for that. He worked here a few years ago, after I begged the manager to let him on. John was fired a few months later, but not before he managed to add something to the comment field for pretty much every single customer he served. Name, Carl Gass. Comments. If he doesn't have late charges and you tell him that he does, he loses his fucking mind. Name, Lisa Franks. Comments. Had sex with her on 11/15. Name, Cara Bullock. Comments. Thinks I have an English accent. Don't forget. Name, Chet. Comments. Always smells like fish. I think he fishes for a living. He's sensitive about it, so I don't bring it up. Name, Rob Arnold. Comments. It's the white Patrick Ewing. Name, Cheryl Mackey. Comments. Had sex with her on 7/16. I gave the cowboy his change, glancing over his shoulder at the TV every chance I could get. They were back to old footage from the hospital, the camera showing close-ups of bullet holes in the walls and shell casings on the floor. The cowboy turned to follow my gaze, saw the TV. That's some scary shit, ain't it? I said, yeah. Whole world's coming to an end. That's what I think. Yeah, probably. Black man in the White House. Yep. The cowboy left. He stuffed his wallet into his back pocket, and I imagined it shooting back out again, squeezed by the sheer pressure of the fabric. I grabbed a DVD and went back to peeling off stickers. I had gotten written up 6 weeks ago because more DVDs were stolen on my watch than either of the other two managers. Not sure what I was supposed to be doing to stop it, other than running out and tackling the kids who tried to walk out with the goods. The problem, I decided, was the magnetic anti-theft tags that would activate the door alarm were in the DVD cases, not on the discs. So it only took the thieves minutes to figure out they just had to pop the disc out of the case and stuff it in their pocket, leaving the case and the theft tag behind. Yes, this town has people who are actually too poor to afford a computer and internet connection to just pirate the movies that way. So I wrote up this angry email to the head office, saying the anti-theft system was idiotic, and that if they were serious about people not stealing discs, then they should put the anti-theft tags on the discs themselves. They agreed, and I and 2 other employees spent about 12 hours sticking these stiff little stickers to all of the new releases in the store. The plan worked beautifully. That is, until last Thursday, when a customer brought in a disc that had been scratched to hell because the theft sticker came unstuck inside his DVD player. It jammed the little tray when it tried to eject the disc, and he had to pry it out. 2 days later, a customer brought in a broken DVD player. When his disc got stuck thanks to the sticker, he wound up breaking the disc tray on the machine trying to free it. I wasn't at the store that day. I was on one of my many sick days. But when I came back, I was greeted by 27 emails from managers and regional managers and other people I had never heard from before, telling me that every anti-theft sticker had to be removed from every DVD by November 5th. I bring this up in case you were wondering why in the holy hell I felt the need to come into work in the middle of what appeared to be some kind of monster infestation. The answer is that if I took one more sick day, I would be fired. And if I didn't get these stickers off by the deadline, I would be fired. And even if I could talk my way out of one firing, I sure as hell couldn't talk my way out of both. And if I was fired, soon after society would decide I wasn't earning my electricity and water and my house and my food. And they'd be right. If you think that's a bad reason to come to work in the middle of all this, then I'm guessing you're still living with Mom and Dad. I glanced up at the TV and saw something new. Security camera footage from inside the hospital. In color, but in a frame rate that made the people appear to blink down the hallway, teleporting 5 feet at a time. There was a shot of a woman running in terror. They cut back to the studio and some older guy in a suit, an expert of some kind they had brought in. Then they cut back to the security video, and I froze. I heard the DVD I was holding fall to the counter. Did I just see that? They played it again. The first frame was Frankie in the hall of the hospital holding a nurse around the throat. The frames rolled forward. A security guard came into frame, hand out, trying to talk Frankie down. Next frame, same players, limbs in different positions. Looked to be about 1 frame per second. The next frame was what got me. At the top of the screen appeared a man in black, and I mean all black, head to toe. A solid black shape. Next frame, 1 second later, he was gone. I stared. They cut back to the anchor. The closed caption lagged behind, but I didn't think I saw any mention of the mysterious figure in the hall. My cell phone screamed. I picked up. Yeah, John said. Dave, can you get to a television? We got one on here. I saw it. The thing in the hall? Yeah, man in black. Shadow Man. Whatever. Man, this isn't a joke anymore. It wasn't a joke before, John. A bunch of people died. You know what I mean. You better sleep with your crossbow tonight. I don't have the crossbow. The cops confiscated it, remember? Okay, then I should come over. I'll bring my lighter. We'll sleep in shifts. No. Wait, bring your what? Come on, man. How do you know Frankie won't show up there? He's surely dead by now. I didn't say he wasn't. I'm busy, John. Sure. I'll try to come up with a plan. Whatever. Hey. Watch the shadows. John, don't do anything stupid. I was talking to a dead phone. 17 hours prior to the outbreak. Disclaimer. The following sequence of events was relayed by John to the author after the fact, and no attempt was made to corroborate this version of events through witness interviews. While there is no evidence directly contradicting any of this account, much of it seems highly unlikely. John wound up needing 5 hours to find Frankie Burgess. That may sound impressive to you, considering there were rows of trained, uniformed men fanning out across several square miles around the hospital all day Friday without success. But it actually took longer than John was hoping. It wasn't until 8 p.m. that he found himself face to face with Frankie across a pane of dirty glass, and he had been hoping to have the whole situation wrapped up while it was still daylight. Night is when bad things happen and undisclosed. Well, bad things also happen in the daytime, but at least you can see where you're going when you're running away. Anyway, in early November, night falls at around 6. So after getting off the phone with Dave at the video store at 3, John had spent an hour driving around in his caddy and getting a sense of the situation around town. The manhunt, which seemed to involve several hundred police, volunteers, and National Guardsmen, appeared to be focused on the wooded area east of the hospital and the empty houses and trailers around it. It made sense from their point of view, he supposed. They were looking for a spot where a deranged and wounded man would crawl off to die. But they weren't going to find Frankie. It wasn't going to be that easy. There were local cops who had to know better, who had to know that the situation at the hospital had been that other thing, the kind of business that pops up and undisclosed every few years when the town decides to start coloring outside the lines. John was picturing the chief trying to nudge the National Guard in that direction, maybe suggesting that they expanded the search, and that maybe additional precautions should be taken with the quarantine. Special hearing protection, perhaps, or hazmat suits. And instead of just the hospital, maybe rope off the whole town, or state. But then that would lead to a lot of awkward questions, and the chief would quickly back down and just pray that the whole thing would come to nothing. If only it ever worked out that way. John, on the other hand, was thinking monster from the start since, the situation was caused by a monster. It was just a matter of figuring out what kind of monster it was. There are really only 2 kinds of monsters in the world, which you already know if you've been watching horror movies. Breeders and non-breeders. So for instance, Frankenstein's monster would fall into the second category if he was real. He's a freak, a singular being, and once you kill him, he's gone. Problem solved. The breeders are an exponentially bigger problem. Within that group, you've got slow breeders like vampires, if they were real, which they're not, which breed in a small-scale controlled way, but mainly to avoid extinction rather than spread. But then you've got the fast breeders, like zombies, if they existed, which they don't, where breeding is all they do. They're basically walking epidemics and are the worst of the worst-case scenarios, because such a creature could, hypothetically, wipe out civilization. This is humanity's greatest fear, which is why at the moment half of the world's horror novels, movie posters, and video games have zombies on the cover. So in any situation like this, step 1 is to find out what category of creature you're dealing with. Step 2 is to anticipate what the creature is going to do next, based on what you determined in step 1. Then, step 3 is you find out if the thing can be killed with a chainsaw. This particular case was a fairly straightforward situation of a small creature taking over a man's head and controlling his body. That is a really specific thing for a creature to do, John thought, requiring countless specialized biological adaptations. So, it was unlikely that it was just some kind of Frankenstein-style genetic mistake with no goal beyond stumbling around biting people until somebody shot it enough times. So, logically, that would mean it was a breeder, and that the taking over of a human body was done to facilitate breeding. What had John worried was that the little shit looked like an insect, and in the normal course of things, insects are notoriously fast breeders. So it could be a worst-case scenario. John suspected that somebody up the ladder had already arrived at that conclusion, which is why on this fine autumn afternoon, you couldn't pull up to a stoplight in undisclosed without finding yourself in a Humvee sandwich. It's also presumably why the hospital had been roped off. So, how do we find Frankie? In John's estimation, that would come down to how much of Frankie's brain was still intact. His body still functioned despite the damage it had taken, so the basic nervous and muscular systems must still have been operated by his own human brain. So there surely had to be some remnant of Frankie's instincts and impulses in there. And Frankie was a cop. John could think of 5 shops in town that sold donuts, none of which said they had seen Frankie when John called.
Where else did cops eat? John drove past a half-dozen fast food franchises and didn't see Frankie inside when he passed. It was getting frustrating. Only 2 hours of light left now. Then, John swung by a Waffle House and found what he was looking for. Waffles. He was good and hungry by that point, and let's face it, it had been a eat breakfast for dinner kind of day. Blueberry waffles, hash browns, washed down with a beer he found in his jacket. Around 5, John dropped by Munch's trailer. Mitch Munch Lombard was one of the 3 bass players in John's band 3-Armed Sally, and had been since high school. He was also a volunteer firefighter, which meant he had a police band scanner at his place. John figured he could stay on top of the manhunt and come up with a new plan. There were a bunch of dudes there already, and everybody was playing Guitar Hero and drinking that purple mix of 7-Up and cough syrup that sent John to the hospital last year. Steve Gammon came up with a huge bag of frozen McNuggets he had stolen from the McDonald's where he worked. They fired up the Fry Daddy and ate McNuggets for an hour. There was a Japanese chick there who was either drunk or just really goofy. Either way, she could barely stand up and laughed at everything that happened. John took a hit of something that he realized gave him the ability to speak Japanese. Or, at least he thought it did. He made words that sounded like Japanese to the girl, and every time he did, she laughed so hard, she almost pissed herself. He hadn't forgotten his mission. Occasionally, John would hear excited voices over the police scanner and would make everybody be quiet. But eventually, everybody got so fucked up they wouldn't do it. Head Feingold and his girlfriend, Jenny McCormick, stopped by with a case of wine she won in a contest, and it was a party all of a sudden. A while later, Head went outside to puke and fell asleep on the deck. John found himself making out with the Japanese girl, but she started calling him by a different name, and he suddenly realized she had been confusing him with another guy all night. Do all white people look the same to the Japanese? John got off the sofa and told her he had to use the bathroom, then quietly threw on his jacket and headed for the door. Dark outside. Damn it. John saw Head passed out on the deck under the grill. He turned around, went back into the trailer, grabbed a comforter and a pillow. He went back out to the deck where Head lay and put the blanket over him and wedged the pillow under his head. Just as he was about to leave again, John heard the scanner crackle to life behind him. The dispatcher was reporting the staff out at the turkey farm west of town were complaining that some vagrant was stealing turkeys. The responding cops said in that coded way cops do, that they had bigger fish to fry. John, on the other hand, jumped off the deck and threw himself into his old Cadillac. He buckled his seatbelt, which he always did because he never knew when he would need to ramp something. He made the engine growl and told the headlights to fuck the night. John had inherited the old Cadillac from a great uncle who passed away the previous summer. There had been quite a heated debate among the family who would be able to get stuck with the terrible car, as no one wanted to have to deal with the process of scrapping it. John volunteered and had been driving it ever since. Creedence Clearwater Revival blasted from an old cassette as John bumped down the highway. He hated Creedence, but Uncle Pat loved them apparently. Or maybe that was just the last tape he had been listening to when all the buttons on the ancient sound system stopped working. Either way, the tape was now in permanent play mode, playing through side A, reaching the end, automatically reversing and playing side B. Forever. As loud as it would go. You couldn't stop it. You couldn't eject it. Where there should have been a volume knob, there was only an empty hole. Not even a little shaft that you could maybe grab with a pair of needle-nose pliers. On each end of the caddy's dash were large lumps where John had wadded up towels and held them over the speakers with electrician's tape, hoping to muffle the sound. It did not. Creedence was determined to be heard. John headed south down the highway, left onto a curve that transitioned to a rural paved road with no painted lines, and across the overpass. Then, around the lake, heading toward a row of enormous, low, blue buildings. Turkey Factory. There was a gravel lane to the right, and John took it so hard he thought he was going to go up on 2 wheels. The caddy bumped and growled on the dirt road, rear end fishtailing like it was on ice, bits of gravel smacking the floorboards with a sound like popcorn. John scanned the grounds for any sign of Frankie. He wasn't feeling so good. The waffles and hash browns and beer and McNuggets and wine and the Japanese girl's chapstick sitting hard in his gut. Oh, shit! He had hit somebody. They were writhing on the hood as John's feet stomped around trying to find the brake pedal. A face was pressed against the windshield, and it was... Frankie, shit! John slammed on the brakes, and the caddy spun out on the gravel. Frankie held on. John reached into his back seat for the chainsaw, then realized there was no chainsaw in the back seat because he had forgotten to drop by Dave's place to get it from his tool shed. Frankie reached around through the driver's side window and snatched at John's shirt. John shrugged away from the hand and dove for the opposite door, pushing his way out and rolling onto the ground. He ran. John's fist pumped toward the light of the turkey building, pulling frozen breaths around the cigarette butts piled up in his lungs. He heard footsteps behind him. John reached the building. There was the door. John yanked it open. The fucking smell. Holy shit. It was one of those stinks that seemed to generate its own warmth. Mold and poop and rotten meat. It hit him like a wall. It looked for a moment like there was a foot of snow inside the building, just white as far as the eye could see in that impossibly huge space. Turkeys. Turkeys so thick you couldn't see the ground. White feathers and thin little twitchy heads, and here and there, a rustle of flapping wings, birds jumping and thrashing and squawking and flailing through the air, demonstrating turkey flight as one of God's failures. John was running again, kicking through turkeys, sucking in air, accidentally eating a feather, looking for a weapon. Where does a turkey farm keep the chainsaws? Thinking fast, John clutched the nearest turkey, spun, and hurled it at his pursuer. Frankie caught the bird like a flapping medicine ball, studied it, then turned and ran out of the building. God damn it, yelled somebody from behind John. You gave him another turkey. You're paying for it. It was a couple of guys in gray coveralls. To the one who looked like he spoke English, John said, Weapons. We need weapons. That's the guy, Frankie. He'll be back after he eats that turkey. Get a chain. Ow! A turkey bit him on the ankle. Wait. Not a turkey. One of those fucking spider monsters. Shit! John kicked the spider off his shoe, hard enough that he expected it to go flying like a punted football. But it was kind of clinging to his shoe, and it only landed about 10 feet away. One of the dudes in coveralls behind him started shouting something in Spanish. John turned to them and said, Kill it! Help me kill that thing! I think Frankie shit it! The dudes seemed to be running away. Hopefully they'd come back with the chainsaw. John backed up, realizing he'd kicked the spider to a spot where it'd be between him and the door. More flapping and gobbling. The turkeys were going crazy where the spider had landed. John could see the spider appeared to be attached to a turkey somehow. Then, one of the spider legs shot out, becoming rigid and 10 times as long. It impaled 4 turkeys as if on a skewer, punching through them with little sprays of blood and feather. The spider extended another tentacle and did it again. 4 more turkeys skewered again. Now, there were 4 rows of turkeys joined at the central point where the spider's body was. The X-shaped cluster of turkeys rose as one body as tall as a man. 2 rows of turkeys forming legs, 2 forming arms. The turkey Voltron took tentative, lumbering steps towards John. He couldn't help noticing that after a few steps, the 2 turkeys it was using as feet had been pulverized into a pink, feathery mess. John stood frozen for several seconds while he tried to decide if any of this was in fact happening. He decided that running was the best option either way. He ran across the building, spotting another door on the opposite wall, kicking turkeys as he went. He shoved through the door and, as if in answer to a prayer he had been too drunk and stoned to pray, there sat a filthy, white pickup truck with a faded cartoon turkey on the door, engine running. John threw himself into the driver's seat, grabbed the gear shift on the steering column, and realized It was the turn signal. He looked down to find the stick on the floor when a bundle of wings, feathers, and stench punched him in the face. He'd been hit in the jaw with a turkey fist. John slapped at the turkey, trying to shove it back out of the window, unsuccessfully. He found the crank to roll up the window, and the turkey gobbled frantically as if it was squeezed by the glass. Behind it was the row of turkeys and the rest of the turkey man's body. John threw the truck in gear and stepped on the gas, hauling the thrashing body of possessed turkeys alongside. Steering with his right hand and punching a confused fist turkey with his left, John smashed through a chain-link fence and plowed through a stack of bags of turkey feed. He cranked the wheel, nearly crashing right into the building he had just left, and found himself heading back towards the overpass, wind gushing through the gap in the window and filling the interior of the truck with feathers. The road curved, but John didn't, and suddenly he was bouncing over rough terrain, the turkey collective exploding in angry gobbles with each bump. And then the terrain was gone. He was tilting in the air. Impact. The steering wheel punched him in the face. John heard a splash. He had time to think. Frankie is alive and Dave doesn't know it. Before everything went black. 12 hours prior to outbreak. At around 9 p.m., I locked up Wally's. I hadn't heard from John since he called in the afternoon, which I considered to be a good thing, since it meant he had probably forgotten about the whole thing and fell asleep on his sofa watching UFC fights. Watch the shadows. That had been the advice from John. Please. This is freaking undisclosed. That's like reminding a passenger on a Brooklyn subway not to fondle the hobos in their bathing suit area. I went home and did a room-by-room search of the house. Nothing out of the ordinary. Also, nothing in any of the closets or in the attic, at least as far as I could tell from sweeping the space with a flashlight from the hatch in the hallway. I decided I should check the crawl space under the house, and then I decided, fuck that. Still, I left every light on. I remembered the power outage that accompanied that little bastard showing up last time, and I was ready for that, too. I had an LED flashlight in my pocket, compact but powerful enough to light up half the backyard, and a bundle of 6 red road flares next to the bed that I had grabbed from my stash in the tool shed. I sat on the bed so that my back was nestled in the corner, the whole room visible from there. I got out my laptop. From the webcam window, Amy said, "What happened to your eye?" I told my psychiatrist about you. She got jealous and came at me with a knife. It was the hospital thing, wasn't it? No. I got a bus ticket. I'm coming down tomorrow. Amy, no, get a refund. It's nothing. The whole thing was overblown. A guy just went crazy and shot some dudes. That's not what John said on TV. That's between me and John. You know how he just says shit sometimes? The news says the army is there. It's just the National Guard or something. They're just trying to reassure people. After 9/11, the strategy has always been to overreact to every little thing rather than risk being wrong once. So, what happened? It's nothing. A guy went crazy and it was scary, and now it's over. Really. Okay, I'm still coming down, by the way. You need me. You're upset, and I can tell. I've seen you like this. You're scared and you're trying to act like you're not. I sighed. If I tell you what's going on, will you back off? Maybe. After a long, dramatic silence, I said, I saw something last night. It kind of disturbed me. Her eyes lit up. Really? What? John, he accidentally sent me a picture of his dick. She wrinkled her nose. Ugh, you sure it was an accident? Ah, I knew you'd find a way to make it worse, dear. She said, you look terrible. I just need to sleep. I needed to hear your voice first. That's all. That's sweet. What do you want to talk about? I glanced out of the window again. No stars tonight. I said, just hypothetically, you'd be okay without me, right? Seriously. If something were to happen to me, you'd move on? Find somebody better? I hate it when you get in these moods, David. Just tell me you'd be okay. I'll sleep better. I love you. I love you too. I'll be down tomorrow.